Hello and welcome to the Transfers podcast, powered by FootballTransfers.com, a new podcast where we bring you news, insight and analysis on that most important of the least important things, football. I'm back again, I'm Ronan Murphy, and I'm joined this week by, as always, Duncan Castles. Hi Duncan, how are things?
Very good. How are you doing, Ronan? Great to have you back. Have you decided on any other minor Irish football clubs to follow since our last pod?
No, we had some commenters wondering why I didn't support Watford United, or Watford FC as they're now called, but being a Carlow man, I have already ruined two neighbouring counties, so I'm not going to ruin Watford nor Wexford, my now local team, but if Carlow in the near future have a team of their own, I might start supporting them. But there's talk of it happening, and they're in the junior leagues, but it's a very different kettle of fish to get a senior team compared to a junior team.
Well, I know the audience were intrigued by the talk about Irish football on the podcast last time around. So let's go into the main affair. What's the subject list this week?
Yeah, so we're looking at England's new manager, which is something that's always of interest to Irish football fans. Watching the European Championship final, I watched it in a pub with a lot of Irish people, and you would have thought that Ireland had won the Euros when Spain got that winner. So yeah, it was one of those kind of situations, and it was extremely enjoyable as a bitter old Irishman. But yeah, we're talking about who will replace Gareth Southgate. We're looking at the situation at Newcastle United. Is there Saudi discontent there? What's going on behind the scenes? Manchester United, as always, are a big talking point. They have been busy in the transfer market. Is this the new dawn that we were waiting for at Manchester United? Then we're looking at the League On television deal that has been a major talking point maybe over there, and I know you have some news on it. And then we're looking at one of the new teams in the Premier League, Ipswich Town. They're going to be a big spend. They've already been big spenders. They're making big moves, and will the big moves be the right idea? Because we've seen it so many times with teams coming out of the Championship and coming up, and what do you do and how do you stay in the Premier League? We'll jump straight into England, and Gareth Southgate is out, and as you rightly said a few weeks ago on the Transfers podcast, this would be the last hurrah of Gareth Southgate. And looking on from the outside, I think he's done a wonderful job with England. I know people talk about having world-class players. I know he fell short a couple of times, but you can't argue with the fact that he made England a great team to watch again. He made the nation fall in love with them again. He got to finals, which nobody else was able to do, even with probably better teams, and maybe in the 2000s, the Gerrard Lampard era. So Gareth Southgate, he's out. Who comes in?
Yeah, I think you summarised the debate around Gareth Southgate well there, although I don't think it would be fair to say that they played well in this last tournament. And I think that's the big question for England now is, I have had some kickback against this, but my view and the view of most of the people I speak to in football is that they have the greatest array of talent and depth of talent, and this is in an era where you're allowed 26 players at major tournaments, so there's a real advantage to having depth of talent that they've ever had, and they're playing poverty football, as I like to call it. Jordan Pickford averaging 19 long balls per game through that tournament against teams, the majority of whom, at least from a ranking basis, you'd expect England to beat. In many ways, you wouldn't be surprised if he'd been doing that with Sam Allardyce in charge, the guy Southgate was brought in to replace. Question is the next step. Where they go? As you said, we talked in the Transfers podcast that Southgate went into this tournament telling the people close to him that it would be his last tournament. So there was no surprise this week that the FA and himself formally announced he was stepping down. And that also, I guess, gives you an indication that the FA will have known that this was a strong possibility that they would need to change, and they've had time to work on their ideas about who will come in. there is certainly no shortage of interest in the position. Again, something we've talked about on previous transfer podcasts. With Guillaume Balaguer, who's very close to Maurizio Pochettino, wrote a book with him. In that book, Maurizio Pochettino spoke about his interest in coaching England in the future. He's talked about that subsequently again. And my understanding is that he is interested in this position, and also has quite an important personal relationship within the senior hierarchy of the FA, and the FA technical director, John McDermott, who will be central to this appointment process, worked with Pochettino very successfully at Tottenham Hotspur and maintains good relationships with him. He is by no means the only big name coach interested in the job. I can tell you that Jose Mourinho's name was proposed to the FA before this tournament started, and there had been discussions about the possibility of Mourinho taking the job. For those with a long memory, Mourinho always took the England job after he was sacked by Chelsea the first time around, to the point where the FA expected it to be announced, but then Mourinho withdrew at the last minute. My guidance from people close to Mourinho this week is that it's extremely unlikely that the FA will take him in this particular instance. Part of the reason for that is, of course, that he's taken the job at Fenerbahce, and a very high-paid job, worth 21 million euros net over the first 2 years of the contract. So that would, one, add a significant cost of recruitment to the FA, and of course a high salary, which I think is a factor in all of this. One of the strategies the FA are considering, and they have briefed that they are not against the idea of a foreign manager. They're going to look at all possibilities. One of the strategies is to wait and see if Pep Guardiola would become available at the end of his current final year of contract at Manchester City. They have the possibility of waiting. They have the possibility of promoting Lee Carsley, the successful under-21 coach. I think he's won 79% of his games in charge of the under-21s, and recently won a international tournament as well. So you could take the line, which of course is something they did with Southgate, of promoting the under-21 manager on a temporary basis or in an interim period, and waiting to see if a guy like Guardiola gave an indication that he would be prepared to take the job. I think that would be the dream appointment for the FA, in the sense of no one is going to argue, or very few people will argue within the English support and within the English media if they get a man of his stature and achievements to date coming in to take the job. The difficulty again, the salary way above the sum that Gareth Southgate earns, so there'd have to be a redistribution, I guess, a reorganisation of the spending patterns within the FA if they're going to go down that line. Having said all of that, and having heard from some sources that the FA are looking to take as much as 3 months before making a decision on this appointment, the general guidance I'm hearing from people in the industry is that the favourite for the job is Eddie Howe. Basically, Eddie Howe is in a position where if he interviews well, it's going to be his decision as to whether he wants that job or not. I think he's the prime English coach. The other name being mentioned, of course, is Graham Potter, who has the advantage of being out of work. But Eddie Howe has had more success in domestic football. He has that big badge of having saved Newcastle from relegation upon his appointment there, and then taking them into the Champions League the year after. And I think he is also in a very interesting position in terms of his club status at present, and this is something we'll talk about more later in the podcast. But there have just been big changes at Newcastle United. The majority owners Saudi Arabia's public investment fund, have just dispensed with Amanda Staveley and Merdad Kudusi as the managing partners and also as co-equity owners of the club, and have bought out their shares in the club. And they've replaced them with a new sporting director in Paul Mitchell. And we can talk about the detail of what that means for Eddie Howe later, but I think it's a pretty standard pattern in football clubs. When new sporting directors come in, the standing manager is going to be unsettled by the change, especially when he loses people who have been so supportive of him, as Staveley and Gudusi have been. And I think if you look at it from Eddie Howe's perspective, and he's someone who as far back as 2016 described the England job as being the ultimate and saying it's something he would never say no to, I think if he does get offered this, he would be crazy to turn it down because of the quality of the squad, because he's going in at a time where there is real potential to win that first international trophy since 1966 for England. And, you know, if you look at it from the perspective of future career, if he goes to England and succeeds where Gareth Southgate, let's just say, almost succeeded, he could have 4 years there, and then he will have his choice of any job in the Premier League, coming out of that job with working relationships with the best of the English players, which all Premier League clubs have an interest in employing. So for me, the strong favourite for this job is Eddie Howe.
Yeah, he seems like a strong appointment and the best of British, as you might say, because I know, like you said, that England and the English FA are looking at a variety of candidates, that it doesn't have to be necessarily an English manager, but you're hearing and seeing from some of the pundits already, the ex-players themselves, they want an English manager, and there's probably this idea that it always should be someone English. I know Germany have the same, that they want their manager to be German, and the same for Spain and a lot of other of the big nations. They consider that it's an important facet of the role to be English, because maybe they see that an outsider doesn't get the kind of connection to the national team the same way as an English person might. So of the English candidates, obviously Eddie Howe is the prime candidate and the best candidate, looking at the resumes, the CVs of the guys that are out there. But I like the idea of this succession plan with Pep Guardiola. I think that's intriguing if you're an England fan. I think English pundits will be willing to look past the nationality on the passport, and they would be willing to wait a year for Pep Guardiola. Obviously a big factor there is if would Lee Carsley take it. And I have some personal experience with Lee himself. He's a really nice guy. He likes to kind of shy away from the media and the limelight sometimes. He's not known for being outspoken or giving his opinion too often. He was obviously in the mix for the Republic of Ireland job a few months ago before he ruled himself out of the running, and there was a lot of people in Ireland who wanted him to get the job. I would have liked to see him get the job, because I think he plays attacking football is what everyone wants to see, and that would be obviously something that England fans want to see after the most recent Euros. And I think he's shown that with the England under-21s. He obviously doesn't have the same strong CV as a lot of the other candidates, because he hasn't managed in the Premier League, say, or he hasn't managed a top club, but I wouldn't put it past him to be a success. And we had something in Ireland a few years ago. Mick McCarthy was the old statesman to come in for one campaign while Stephen Kenny was looking after the under-21s, and then being promoted to the senior manager role once Mick's single campaign was over. And there was questions around that. Well, what happens if Mick is really successful and he's really good? Can you really cut him off after 1 year? And you might, if they did have a succession plan of an interim manager, a caretaker manager, what if he does really well in those games where he's in charge? I know we obviously don't have competitive matches like the World Cup qualifiers or anything, but he will be in charge for the Nations League. It's an enticing set of Nations League fixtures that England have, with Ireland first up, actually. And it'd be interesting to see a a former Ireland international in the dugout for England and the former Ireland international on the field for England against Ireland in that one. But that's a different point.
In Dublin. I think. So
Dublin.
Lee Carsley, Irish grandmother born in Birmingham. I think we have to remember you raised the continuity question, and that's exactly how Southgate got the job. He was the interim. He did well in his matches, and he was appointed to the position full time, and that suited the FA then. And they then allowed Southgate to do his kind of complete overhaul of the working practices of the national team. I think I might dissent a bit on whether Eddie Howe is actually the best candidate for the job. And my good friend Ian McGarry, who I used to do a podcast with for many years, never missed the opportunity to talk about Eddie Y when Eddie Howe's name was mentioned. And look, this past season I think has been quite telling about his limitations as a club manager. The blame has been on the injuries Newcastle United suffered this season, and that's why their performance has dropped from 4th place to an eventual 7th place. But I think when you get a coach who has never had to play European football before, and he uses the same preparatory practices as he's used through his entire career, it's not a surprise that a lot of players get injured because they're being worked too hard in the training sessions and not being rotated properly for the game. So I think he has made some fundamental mistakes there. And for me, and I'm not complaining about this as a Scotsman, but I am quite happy to see England continually go for the perceived best of their potential coaching appointments every time they put a manager in, because English coaching has, from a results perspective, clearly been substandard over at least the period of the Premier League. An English coach has never won the Premier League. If you went through the Premier League now and ranked coach after coach, where would you put Eddie Howe and Graham Potter? I don't think they're getting very high on that list. And I think, and a lot of people have pointed this out, I think that is one of the fundamental problems England face if they're in this dilemma where supporters, where the FA would prefer to have an Englishman in charge if they can do it. I know when I mentioned Pochettino's interest in the job on social media this week, the response of everyone, every England fan who responded to it was, no, we can't have an Argentine in charge of a national team, and we've gone down the foreign coach line before and it didn't work, and we shouldn't do it now. So there is this strong preference, let's put it that way, to have an Englishman in charge, but I'm not sure they have a really top quality candidate to place in charge.
Yeah, I think that was kind of the point I was making. He's the best English candidate, but
yes,
is he the best candidate? And obviously he isn't. Like you said, there are winning managers and proven managers out there, but I suppose there could be many Newcastle fans that would disagree and say that he has proven himself, because he, like you said, he turned them from a bottom team to a team that was able to challenge, and they look at a different team. I know part of that is down to what happens off the pitch, but you can't argue with results either. So I suppose that's what the FA have to weigh up, and that's why, like you said, if he interviews well, the job is his.
That's the sense I get from the work I've done on it this week. Let's talk about Newcastle United, because that situation there is fascinating. The decision to dispense with Amanda Staveley and her husband Merdad Goudoussi, who co-purchased the club with PIF and the Reuben brothers in 2021, who were, I think it's fair to say, absolutely instrumental in the sale of the club. This was Amanda Staveley's idea, and she spent years working on the idea that the club could be sold from Mike Ashley to investors who were able to finance the football side properly and turned into a Champions League side, and spent or borrowed a lot of money in order to get to place herself in a position where she ultimately was able to sell to the Saudis, she has been the front of the club. There's, the subject of adulation from Newcastle United fans. Search some of the YouTube videos. I think there's a little song about Amanda, which I always found very amusing, which I'll dig out and put on social media.
You're not going to try and sing it yourself?
I definitely won't make our listeners suffer that fate. This separation away should not be seen as a mutual decision. It was taken by PIF, by the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund. They decided, for a number of reasons, that Staveley and Gudusi's management contract needed to be terminated. And then a deal was done with them in which they paid them off for their equity investment and paid them, I'm told, for the residual length on the management contract. There's a key line in the statement that was made by the club about the change of direction, and that is that they were focused on their pursuit of long-term sustainable success. And it is no coincidence that this change happened after the scramble Newcastle United went through to clear their profit and sustainability position with the Premier League at the end of June. They sold one of their top teenage talents, Gambia international Yankuba Minte, to Brighton, and one of their best academy products, Elliot Anderson, who had established himself in the first team, to Nottingham Forest for over £60 million in that final week, and also did a deal with Nottingham Forest in which they, in most people's view, significantly overpaid for Greece goalkeeper Odysseus Vlachodimos in one of those PSR swap deals that were so controversial. They're by no means the only club in the Premier League that got involved in it, but that was their particular move with Nottingham Forest. They were fielding offers for Alexander Isak as people in the rest of the league saw the struggles they were in to get enough cash before the end of June so that they wouldn't be punished on the PSR rules and get themselves into points penalty, such as Everton and Nottingham Forest had last season. They even discussed selling one of their prime asset, Anthony Gordon, to Liverpool. And on top of that, accepted a low ball compensation offer from Manchester United for Dan Ashworth, their sporting director. A story that had rolled on for various months, and Newcastle had briefed that they wanted 20 million in compensation for Ashworth. One of my sources says the eventual fee was 3 million that they received. What the Saudis have done as a replacement is to bring Paul Mitchell in as sporting director. And Paul Mitchell will work in a different way. He will work from the perspective of what is the resource available to me? What can you afford to invest in this team? What can we do from financial fair play perspective? What's the target? And the target is still to be a consistent Champions League performer. The phrase used was consistently credible competitor in domestic and European competitions. And how can I take that resource and restructure the operations of the club, restructure the way we work in the transfer market in order to get to that long-term position? The feeling amongst the Saudi, I understand, was that Staveley and Gudusi were too eager to spend heavily early and hope to sort out the problems when the problems came down the line, and they did not like what happened in June, and they want it done on a more structured fashion, which kind of fits with a lot of the background noise I'd been hearing from Newcastle during this period of co-ownership, in that there was a lot of complaints that PIF were very much focused, as you'd expect an investment trust company to be, on numbers, on going through due process, on spreadsheets, on wanting to check all of these big decisions and decide whether it made accounting sense. And that I'm told was a frustration for Staveley and Guendouzi, who wanted to move quicker and felt that they could push themselves and stay in the Champions League places by, and this isn't a word they are using, but it's a word that observers are using, gambling a bit on the market. So this is really a fundamental change to Newcastle's operation. I don't think people have realised to what extent the surprise exit from Staveley and Guendouzi indicates a change in policy, change in direction, very different kind of operation from Paul Mitchell, who is impressive standing the game and can refer back to his time at MK Dons, Southampton, Tottenham, Leipzig, Red Bull, Monaco, and finding a lot of value in the transfer market. But he's not really a talent spotter. He's more an organisational person who tries to get best in class people in each of the positions within the football departments, and then tries to use the resource of the club as efficiently as possible to meet its targets. And I think it's going to be very interesting to watch what Newcastle do the rest of this transfer window, and where they go over the next few seasons, because I don't think it's going to be as much of an attempt at rocket ship progress as they had under Staveley and Guendouzi. And I think, as I alluded to earlier on in this podcast, I think that this is very important factor to consider when we see if England do offer the job to Eddie Howe.
Would that be kind of, it suits all parties for Eddie Howe to go to England?
Yeah, I think this is the possibility. As I've already said, Eddie Howe is on record, and a long time before he became Newcastle United manager, as saying that he could not turn down the England job. I think he's avoided speaking on record so far. Now the England job has come open. And I'm not saying that Paul Mitchell wants to change the coach. I absolutely don't have that information. But if you have the typical pattern of a new sports director coming in, it's usually the case the sports director eventually changes the coach. If Howe is unhappy with the changes, and again, this is an if rather than I'm not saying that he is unhappy with what's happened, but what I can tell you is a very close relationship with Staveley and Guendouzi, and this is an abrupt change on Newcastle United's part and the Saudis' part. And I think most people in the kind of position he's in any walk of life, are going to be unsettled when their closest line managers, their closest allies, the people who were helping them buy players and change aspects of the running of the club and listening to their guidance on it, are moved out. They're going to be unsettled by that. I should also say here, because this is the on-record statement, that Darren Eales, the chief executive of the club, had referred to the multi-year contract that Newcastle signed with Eddie Howe last year, and said they're not interested in losing Eddie Howe, and they're seeking to retain him, and he will not be easy to deal with. But there is an opportunity, should the water flow in that direction, that they take a compensation package from the FA for Eddie Howe's services, and then Paul Mitchell is able to place a new coach in charge.
So, like Ian would have said, Eddie Wen is what we're looking for.
Very good. Very good.
Obviously, you're talking about Paul Mitchell and transfers, and one of the transfers that Newcastle seem to be involved in is James Trafford. And to many on the outside, it kind of has an air of, why are they pursuing this? Because they already have nearly half a dozen goalkeepers already.
Yeah, they have 5 senior goalkeepers on their books at present. This is something that's gone on for several months. There's been discussions and offers to Burnley for the player. Newcastle haven't met Burnley's asking price. As I understand it, Newcastle remain interested in the player. They see England under-21 goalkeeper, someone who was developed at Manchester City, which is generally a very good thing to have on your CV as a young player these days. If you can go through the market and look at the number of quite significant transfer fees paid for Manchester City Academy product and even Manchester City Academy products who have had little or no experience in the first team. And as I understand it, they're continuing to pursue that deal if they can get to an acceptable number from Burnley. My information on what Burnley want is that they're expecting a transfer fee and a deal that will be worth £30 million in total before they would sell Trafford. And they are now in a position where I think they can retain Trafford and play him in the Championship this season. They've sold Arianet Muric to Ipswich Town, which we will talk about later in the podcast, for an initial £10 million with a further £5 million of performance-related variable payments. So they've taken money on a goalkeeper, and were they to sell Trafford, they'd have to bring a new starting goalkeeper in.
Another club that are making big moves in the transfer window is Manchester United, and we always like to see Manchester United. Me as a journalist and someone who sells stuff on social media is trying to get Manchester United into the headlines, and it's great to see Manchester United making moves for big players and players in demand, and they've been very aggressive so far in the transfer market. And is that the change of direction that we've been expecting and waiting from the new Man United investors?
Surprisingly aggressive, given that they'd been briefing that finances were tight, relatively tight, that they needed to shift players out in order to make very significant moves in the transfer market. As we've discussed on recent transfers podcasts, Joshua Zirkzee, the Netherlands striker, has agreed, and the deal is now done, to move him from Bologna for €42.5 million. Bit of a clue in that transfer fee, in that Zirkzee had a €40 million release clause, and Manchester United overpaid the Serie A club in order that they could stagger the payments on the deal over the course of the contract, rather than having to pay the full 40 million this summer. But there was a significant additional expense in that deal. Aurelio Capaldi explained to us that Zirkzee had agreed to join AC Milan several weeks ago, and Milan were prepared to pay the 40 million, but they balked at paying Zirkzee's agent, Kia Jarabshina, the €15 million commission he was asking for on top of the transfer fee. Manchester United have paid, I understand, not quite the 15 million, but a very substantial fee to Jarabshin in order to make that deal happen. The real statement move, though, has been the purchase, or agreed purchase, as of when we're recording, for Lenny Yoro of Lille, 18-year-old centre-back, again, someone we talked about in this podcast several times, who had been chased by several of the top clubs in Europe. Paris Saint-Germain had conversations about his signing. Real Madrid believed they had the player's commitment to go there, that his preference was to go to Real Madrid, and had been lowballing Lille on their offers and threatening to wait for a year's time when Yoro's contract at Lille expired, and taking him on a free transfer, which is a pretty standard Real Madrid transfer strategy these days. A strong interest also from Liverpool. But Manchester United have actually overpaid on what Leo were suggesting as an asking price for the player. The word was €60 million would do it to get Yoro out from the Ligue 1 club. Manchester United have agreed an initial €62 million with another €8 million of what are described to me as easily achievable bonuses. So Leo fully expect to make the 70 million total fee for that deal. Also, a very substantial salary for a player who at Leo was on his first professional contract. Guidance I have was that he was asking for a basic 7 million euros net, with substantial performance bonuses on top of that. They've given him a 5-year deal with an option of an additional season. So it's a big investment in a player who's considered to be one of the top young talents at centre back. Possibly not what you'd expect of a young French centre back, in that he's basically very safe, he's very dependable, he passes simply, doesn't try and carry the ball out of defence, he just concentrates on doing the defensive aspects well. Here at FootballTransfers, we use Sky Sports estimated transfer value quite a lot to assess get a sense of what the real value of a player should be based on their performances to date and comparing them against their peers. The ETV for Yoro, interestingly, comes out at 28.5 million euros. So they're way over that, but let's caveat that with ETVs on younger players tend to be relatively low.
It also tie in the fact that the ETV is based on the length of his contract, so that was probably what Real Madrid were thinking about. So because he only has 1 year left, it will be closer to their valuation than, say, Manchester United valuation.
And interesting you say that, Ronan, because my information on what Real Madrid offered was 20 million euros guaranteed, 10 million euros in bonuses. So that would be almost spot on, that figure. I think the other interesting thing in this deal is that money that they've put down for Yoro, both in terms of transfer fee and in terms of the wages. I think that would have secured Jared Branthwaite from Everton. They made 2 offers for the player. Everton rejected both of them. There was a sense that Everton would sell if the number got high enough. And look, if you take Branthwaite, I think you get a safer bet, probably with a lower ceiling in terms of what he could become as a player. But you get someone who already knows how to play in the Premier League, who is already based in almost in the same part of the country. I think with Branthwaite, if you signed him as Manchester United, you could have an expectation that the player would spend his whole career with you if things went well. And I think an expectation that there's less risk of a failure in the transfer. And let's face it, Manchester United have spent a lot on foreign players in the last years. Jim Ratcliffe talks about over $1 billion being invested in transfers and wasted. And they've had a lot of deals for younger players fall through when they get to the club. I don't think it's a simple thing to move to Manchester United as a foreign player from another country. There are a lot of factors that makes it more complicated. Not saying that's going to happen with Yoro, but I think they have gone for the riskier move here, but perhaps the one with the higher payoff because Yoro can reach a higher ceiling as a player. One other element is with Yoro, with a French player and with a player who they know preferred to go to Real Madrid initially, there is the risk that he pushes to move elsewhere as he runs this current contract down. Whereas with someone like Branthwaite, I think it's easier to retain an English player, a player from the Northwest at United if it does work well. So fascinating deal, but definitely a serious statement of intent from Manchester United, and one that's gone down extremely well with the supporters, that they seem to have beaten off Real Madrid and Liverpool and Paris Saint-Germain, who stepped away when they heard the salary demands, I'm told, for this player.
Yeah, I'd imagine Liverpool's kind of side of things was a similar sort of step back, because if you're saying 7 million a year, that's 135,000 a week, and that would be more than many of Liverpool's senior players will be getting paid.
After tax, that's net.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think absolutely out of the price range that Liverpool are everything I hear around the market is Liverpool are trying to be very measured in what they do in the transfer market. They're playing the value line that their ownership has done through most of the time at the club. And I think the change to a new coach, the change of regime, the exit of Jurgen Klopp, all of these things, the return of the sports directors to the club, all of these things play into a model of incremental change at Liverpool. And look, quite possibly I'll be wrong in this, but I'll be surprised, very surprised, if Liverpool do anything of this nature in the market to spend that kind of money on an 18-year-old centre-back with those kind of salary demands. I do not see Liverpool doing that in this transfer window.
Yeah, you can see Manchester United making that gamble, but it's a gamble that has pleased the fans, because there's a lot of talk of Manchester United are back on social media now, and in the fans. They're very excited by this signing, and they're right to be very excited by getting in these attractive young players to come into the club and maybe begin a new era at Manchester United. And I suppose maybe there's more to come. Do you know what else do Manchester United want?
They definitely want a combative central midfielder. We've talked about Manuel Ugarte. They're interested in Manuel Ugarte from Paris Saint-Germain, who is available for sale if someone matches the fee PSG paid for him last summer, which is 60 million euros. There is definitely a interest in signing a right back, which they need if they are to sell Aaron Wan-Bissaka, who's in the final year of his contract, and who is available for sale. Look, as we've discussed, the majority of players in the Manchester United squad are available for sale if the price is correct. My guidance on what Manchester United are asking for Wan-Bissaka is £15 million. There is interest there from West Ham United, which would allow Wan-Bissaka to move back to London. He is also represented by the same agent as West Ham United's new coach, Julian Lopetegui. So there's a lot of sense to that deal. Interesting one is the potential sale of Scott McTominay, because as I've said, they want more combative midfielders. They feel they need players who are ball winners in midfield to balance out the players they want to retain in the squad. And from that perspective, placing McTominay on the market is an interesting move. Again, he only has 1 year left on contract. There's an option to extend for a further year. He is wanted by Fulham as a replacement for Jean Paulinho, who has now joined Bayern Munich for an initial 51 million euros. Galatasaray are on record as saying that they have been in negotiations with Manchester United for the player. Also interested in Pierre-Emile Højbjerg from Tottenham, who's available for sale. Fulham have made an offer for McTominay. My guidance is that offer is less than £30 million, and that Manchester United's asking price for the Scotland midfielder is £40 million. But I think that there is a real possibility that McTominay will move on in this window, which, in my view, might be a mistake on Manchester United's part. I think he is a player who has performed well from them throughout his career there. He fills in a number of positions. I think he's actually been hampered in his own personal development by not having a fixed position in the team. Personally, I think he's probably best playing just off the centre forwards as a kind of combative number 10 with his ability to score goals.
Yeah, it could be something that we see him develop elsewhere, and maybe the move is best for him, but not necessarily best for Manchester United at the moment.
Look, I think the sense here is that they have to be open to selling whoever they get the best offers for, and I guess having invested that amount in Yoro and Xerxes, they're more susceptible to having to take money, the best money they get for that large cadre of players that they've made available for sale. We should also mention Mason Greenwood, who has agreed to join Olympique Marseille. He can reach 31.6 million euros. And there is a significant sell-on for Manchester United if he succeeds at Marseille, as they hope he will do, and I think as generally as people expect he will do after his season at Getafe, and then moves on to a bigger club later. Interestingly, my guidance from the Marseille end on this is that they're very happy with the way that deal's been structured, in that they feel they got favourable terms from Manchester United, with a lot of the payments being conditional on performance and a lot of the structuring of the deal being conditional on performance. So maybe it's one of those unusual occasions in football where both sides like the structure of a deal. And this one, I guess, with Greenwood, we have to talk about in a different way, because I think if you were to do it in a football perspective only, there's no argument that United would have kept Greenwood at the club, but that option has been taken away from them by the players' behaviour and by the furore around the players' behaviour. So they have been forced to go down this line of moving him first to Spain, trying to rehabilitate his career in another country, and hoping that they can maximise revenue on the eventual transfers to other clubs.
Yeah, to be to seeing how he will, what Olympique Marseille fans will react to the signing. Obviously, we know of his talent, and a lot of people talk a lot of his talent, but you can't get away with everything else that surrounds the player. You can't separate the two. So I think Manchester United, for them, financially, the best part possibly they could hope for, and they've moved on. And if he is a success like they hope, they will continue to make money off him, and which is the state of football today. He is moving to a league with its problems. It's a separate, totally unrelated problem, but TV problems they were having for a long time, and I know you'd know something about that.
Yeah, this is a fascinating situation in France, in French football, which I think has repercussions for the whole European game, and is a kind of canary like indicator of where TV deals are, where the bidding for TV deals are in European football. And we know that this transfer market that we talk about, in which this podcast is principally focused on, is in the main driven by this TV money. Broadcast revenue is the most important revenue stream for football clubs, particularly in a country like France, where gate receipts are low. And if that broadcast revenue falls away, then the market is going to have big problems, and football, I think, is going to have big problems. But where France are is that they've just provisionally agreed, they've voted on an offer from two broadcasters, DAZN, who have Italian and a lot of the other European football rights, and beIN, which of course is the Qatar owned broadcaster, so basically the same people who own and run Paris Saint-Germain. They have offered 500 million euros a year between them. beIN will pay 100 million euros for access to the prestige game each weekend, and DAZN will pay an average of 400 million euros a year. It'll be less in the first year, and laddered payments through the 5-year term of the deal for the remainder of the games. Now, that offer represents a 16.5% decrease on the last television deal, which has already expired. So these negotiations, which, as I say, aren't absolutely complete, the deal hasn't been signed off on as yet, have been going on with just a month to go before the season itself kicks off. It's also 38.5% decrease on the disastrous 2020 deal the league did with MediaPro, a Spanish-Chinese company who withdrew from the offer and from broadcasting French football after just a couple of months. The whole auction process has been catastrophic, and when I say catastrophic, I'm quoting people involved in the process, quoting people from the clubs talking about what happened. The LFP president, Vincent Lebrun, went into this process a year ago aiming for €1 billion of revenue for the domestic TV rights, and telling the clubs that he was going to get it, and basically leading them to believe that Apple were going to pay that €1 billion for domestic rights. In the end, nobody made an offer. The long-term partner of French football, Canal+, who are kind of like the Sky relationship with Premier League football, publicly stated they wouldn't bid. And they got themselves into a situation where, as I say, with a month to go, they had no deal. One of the club owners, Lyon's John Textor, also a co-owner of Crystal Palace and various clubs around world football, wanted the league to set up its own streaming service from scratch, with no guarantees of revenues for the clubs, no company behind it to do the sales process, no broadcasters, no commentators. I'm told there was even a suggestion that they delay the start of the French league season in order to enable them to get this streaming service up and running in time for the league to start. Eventually, the vote against that was 16-2 and in favour of the DAZN beIN partnership. Couple other bits of information around this was that I'm told by two well-placed sources that had they gone down the streaming route with no guarantees of revenue, because you only get the money coming in as subscriptions are paid rather than the broadcast scenario where money is paid up front, that as many as 4 Ligue 1 clubs could have been bankrupted by the transition to the streaming deal, because they need money now in order to pay their wages through the summer and at the start of the season. And also that the French president, Emmanuel Macron, was involved in this process, calling the Emir of Qatar to try and convince him to get beIN into the process to provide additional money to the zone, and to get the figure something in the direction of what they had for the last deal, which was 605 million for Amazon and Canal+. It was split between the two of them. So ramifications of this, I think, one, if you are a Premier League club or a German club looking at the main talent factory in European football, which is France, you'll be thinking there are some bargains to be had this summer, because each of these clubs are under what they expected to be going into this coming season with. On a broader scale, you can look through the big European leagues and look at the recent domestic deals, and a pattern's emerging here. Obviously, France has taken a big hit on its TV deal that runs till 2029, although the league are trying to negotiate a clause which allows them to step away from the deal in 2 years' time. That's why it hasn't been signed off totally, because the zone don't want that to happen, but the league would like an exit clause if someone comes in and offers them more money. The French have gone down. The Italians have gone down to 900 million a year. La Liga went marginally down to 990 million a year on their last deal, which runs to 2027. The Bundesliga are running an auction process at the moment. Their last deal went down in value. And if you're the Bundesliga, you can't be happy about what the French have just done and what's just happened to Serie A, because that sets out a signal on the value of sports rights. And even the Premier League deal, which was hailed as an increase in total money for the domestic deal, which is £6.7 billion over 4 years. Even that deal, if you look at it in real terms, you factor in inflation compared to the last time the rights were sold, and you look at it in terms of the huge amount of extra content the Premier League sold, so a lot more games for that 6.7 billion. The cost per game has gone significantly down. So essentially, you've got all 5 of the major European leagues running into a brick wall in terms of real-term increase in TV revenue. You also have FIFA, just last weekend, reopening the bidding for the Club World Cup rights. And this is a familiar story again. The idea was that this new Club World Cup next summer was going to be broadcast by Apple, FIFA were going to get a big chunk of cash from Apple. That's not happened, and they have reopened the tender process, so they're a year out from this flagship tournament, and they don't have any guarantee on TV rights either. I think it's a worrying sign for football in general that the biggest source of revenue seems to be at best staying static, and possibly going into decline.
Yeah, I think a quote of it being a catastrophe could be true for everywhere. Is it a case that the market is becoming oversaturated with too much football? And one of the complaints we had at the European Championships, that the players were tired from too much football.
Yeah.
Is there too much football? Yeah. And is there the appetite in the viewer if the TV companies aren't willing to pay the fees that are being requested or enter into the bidding auctions and etc. for it?
Yeah, look, it's more content, isn't it? FIFA Club World Cup is a new tournament. You expand the World Cup to 48 teams, more games. European Championship goes to 24 games, more games. The Premier League effectively have expanded the amount of live TV content available. They're selling more of their games, the highest percentage of the games ever. And there has to be someone there to watch them. And obviously it's a marketplace situation. You have to have broadcast companies competing against each other to push the value of the TV rights up. And what France has seen was a bidding process where nobody made a bid. They set a reserve price, which nobody was prepared to offer money for, and they end up selling at the last minute for less than the reserve price, with the president of France intervening to try and get one of the core clients of the league, because Qatar own Paris Saint-Germain, and Qatar can't afford for the French league to go into reverse to throw in 100 million euros a year for that premium game. And what I forgot to mention, it wasn't for the right that they get for this 100 million. They also get some sponsorship rights of the league, which they're able to resell. So essentially, the league has sold 20% of its TV rights to beIN for less than 100 million euros. It's not a pretty situation for French football, and I would argue not a pretty situation for European football either.
No, it's not. And tying into what I said about is there too much football, I think there's possibly too much sport, because you're seeing NFL getting an extra game in the season. You're seeing NBA having a summer tournament. So there just seems to be more and more sport. So
more sport running and more content generally.
Yeah. So I don't think these problems are going to go away. If anything, they're going to get worse. If we move back into the world of transfers, one team had been sent away, and that's Ipswich Town, which you mentioned in the intro. They're obviously trying to make a big splash because they need to, and a lot of these teams that go from the Championship to the Premier League need to. So I think they're the second biggest spenders at the moment. So what is Ipswich's strategy here?
Yeah, if you look at it in net terms, Ipswich Town are the second highest spenders of the Premier League clubs at present. And again, we can refer to Sky Sports' estimated transfer value assessment of players. They're paying over the estimated transfer values of the players they're buying. We mentioned Muric from Burnley, the goalkeeper. I think a good signing for them, with a reliable goalkeeper most of the time, apart from well publicised incident last season, but a key part of Burnley coming from the Championship into the Premier League. They've taken a striker, Liam Delap, from Manchester City for an initial £15 million. They have Jacob Greaves from Hull City, who they were going to buy in tandem with Jadon Philogene for combined fees in excess of £36 million, but eventually lost Philogene to Aston Villa because Villa had matching rights on that deal, which they exercised for the attacking midfielder. They turned Omari Hutchinson's loan from last season into a permanent transfer for a guaranteed fee in excess of £20 million. And I think that's the one that people feel is really overpriced. His estimated transfer value is €7 million. And they're still in the market. I'm told they're looking for a left-sided number 10 because they didn't get Philogene. And they also want a box-to-box midfielder. So they've already spent over 60 million in guaranteed transfer fees. I think it's a good bet they'll take that guaranteed transfer fee spend to over 100 million by the end of this window, which is basically the guaranteed money for being in the Premier League. Clearly, they feel they have to upgrade, which makes sense given that they've done 2 consecutive promotions. So you're essentially starting with a League One squad and have residual elements of a League One squad there. You have the factor of Kieran McKenna, who signed a new contract, an improved 4-year contract in May, having been subject of discussions with Chelsea and Manchester United, also discussions at Brighton that he should take over there, though my guidance is that Brighton were concerned that McKenna was going to follow the same path as Roberto De Zerbi in the sense that he saw Brighton as a stepping stone to his next move. And in Fabian Hürzeler, the German-American coach they feel they have a better fit to their recruitment model and the play model they've been using with Potter and De Zerbi. But I think Ipswich here are giving McKenna a big investment in his squad to give him the best chance to stay in the Premier League. But also, I don't think it's just simply a sporting perspective here. What they're doing is they're investing in primarily English players, primarily young players, primarily guys who've played in the Championship, and players who, I think it cuts either way. If they manage to stay in the Premier League with this new squad, then the values will go up significantly. If they go down to the Championship, the players should improve from being tested in the Premier League. And if only, say, a couple of them do really well in the Premier League from this season, and they have a good coach to work under in McKenna, then those couple of players who have done well are going to be targets for Premier League clubs. So they can probably bank significant profits on players who they bought this summer, even if they go down, and then essentially it becomes an investment of that 100 million you get for being in the Premier League into talent, which you ideally keep for yourself. But if you can't keep for yourself, then you make a profit on some of that 100 million, and you use it again in the next Championship season to invest to try and get back up into the Premier League. So I think it's quite a clever strategy from Ipswich Town, but they're definitely the outlier in terms of this market in the amount of money that they're putting into transfer fees at present.
I suppose they have that windfall, whereas most of the other teams might necessarily not, but it does seem like a good approach. And I think, like you said, these players with a year of Premier League experience under their belt, their value should rise, because they're buying players with potential, and if they can show some of that potential and they have that experience, there will be other clubs willing to kind of put back in at least the investment which you've already put into the players. It probably isn't the worst strategy we've ever seen from teams coming up. It seems to be maybe more long-term planning than short-term panic. Oh, we need to get players in because we're going to struggle in the Premier League. It's more an overall bigger picture view of things, that what they've invested in, and hopefully it works out for them, because it is great to see Ipswich Town back in the Premier League. They are a team with a rabid fan base, so it's good to see them back.
Yeah, I think a combination of short-term and medium-term planning. It's a different strategy, but it has a rationality about it that you would say you'd like to see them succeed with it.
Yeah, that you could see other people following suit. It could be the new Moneyball approach to the Premier League. I think it's that time of the week, so hero and villain time. So did you want to pick a hero this week, Duncan?
Hero this week, I think, is very easy and probably sadly obvious, but it has to be the new European champions, Spain. I was sorely tempted to go with Uruguay coach Marcelo Bielsa for describing the organisers of the Copa America that finished this week as a plague of liars, while criticising the organisation's security, the quality of the pitches of a nation in the United States, who, let us not forget, will be hosting that inaugural Club World Cup in a year's time, and more importantly, the majority of the World Cup in 2 years' time. But I think it has to be Spain for their performance throughout the European Championship, for the quality of the play, for the risk-taking, for the one-touch football they use to score a lot of their goals, and the statistics they put together. Most goals scored, defeating Italy, Germany, France and England, the 4 other European nations to win a World Cup during the tournament. Compare that with England's run to the final, having the youngest ever player in the Euros in Lamine Yamal, and deserving winner of the Young Player of the Tournament, and the oldest ever in Jesus Navas. And then this incredible statistic that Spain's national team and La Liga clubs have won 23 consecutive major international finals since 2001. Just incredible. Every time they get to a final, they not only know how to win it, they actually do win it.
Yeah, so your hero is the entire nation of Spain.
Yeah.
And Spanish people all around the world.
They're the pinnacle of the nation. They all contribute to this. Let's go for the whole nation of Spain. And they are super popular throughout Europe at present for preventing what would have been described as football coming home.
Yeah, men's football can stay away for another few years anyway. Yeah, we'll see if Eddie Howe maybe is the man to bring it home in 2 years from the United States.
To bring it to its alleged home.
Yeah, allegedly, yeah. It's always good to get the opinion of a Scot and an Irishman on football coming home. Yeah, I'm sure our English listeners will be overjoyed to hear us wax lyrically about the team. Yeah, so my villain of the week, unfortunately, it has to be Enzo Fernandez and Chelsea this week. We've all seen the Fernandez video, or we read about it. Racist, transphobic, many disgraceful things. It's shocking to see, but I think it's even shocking to see the half-hearted apology to come out of the player, to come out of the club. I think football has long had a racism problem, has a homophobia problem. These problems are kind of littered in sport, but especially football. And I think Chelsea need to do more and come down stronger than the statement they've put out on it, and they need to show support for people who needs to support and show that scenes like this and opinions like this and songs like this, they're just not acceptable in the modern world, and we've moved past this to a more open society. And I hope, they said they're having an internal investigation, but I hope something comes of this investigation. But like anything, I'm not sure it will, and we kind of need to, if nothing does come to it, I think people need to kind of make themselves heard and make sure that these things cannot go unpunished.
They certainly have a major internal problem there, in that there are a large number of players in the Chelsea squad some of whom have publicly stated that were completely unimpressed with what Enzo Fernandez did. And he's obviously one of their key assets at the club. Don't know if it's a Mason Greenwood situation. I don't know if Chelsea supporters will respond in the same way as Manchester United supporters did when the Mason Greenwood allegations surfaced. But that is a potential path. It is interesting just from an observer's point of view to see whether Chelsea, who have a number of other internal issues to resolve at present, have the quality of management to navigate this problem in a way that that people feel is acceptable.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm ending the podcast on the most positive note. Maybe for villain, I should have just picked Declan Rice as the former Ireland midfielder playing for England in the European final. He's now the first ex-Ireland international to lose back-to-back European finals. So at least he's done well for himself there. So onwards and upwards for Declan.
Is he not a hero of Ireland for managing to subvert the England performance at the final?
Maybe that's what he did. Maybe that's what he was doing all along. It was some sort of counter-espionage sort of job. Maybe Declan was our secret agent in midfield all along. You've been listening to the Transfers podcast powered by FootballTransfers.com. If you liked what you heard, please follow us on your favourite podcast platform and turn on automatic download to get the latest episode as soon as it's released. If you really like the Transfers podcast, please lend us just a bit more of your time by rating or reviewing the pod. Your support helps build a bigger audience and bring you more news, analysis and insight. You can also follow and message us on Facebook, Instagram and YouTube at Transfers Podcast, and you can follow us on Twitter at TransfersCast. Duncan is on Twitter and Instagram at Duncan Castles. I'm at Swear I'm Not Paul on Twitter. And we now have a WhatsApp channel too, so you can search for the Transfers Podcast on WhatsApp or follow the link in the show note. Our music and production, as always, is by Mark Caulfield at Pro Podcast Production. We'll be back next week. Stay safe, be well, and thank you for listening.